Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C. that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. I've talked before about how not all movies that are based on books are bad, and that some of them are better than the books they're based on. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for today's movie, which is one I used to love when it came out, but as I just recently read the book, it makes me sad that we have another contender for the bad book adaptation department. This is the admittedly silly but awesomely titled Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. The movie is based off the book of the same name, which was also written by the author of the novel, Seth Grahame-Smith. The book has been considered by many to be both a historically accurate version of Abraham Lincoln's life, with a little flair of vampire horror that's exciting and fun for the gorehounds. I personally found the book to be a compelling and fun read, as it reminded me of movies like the Brendan Fraser version of The Mummy, where even though the concept is silly, you could still take it seriously. The same cannot be said for the movie. Critics found it to be mediocre and lacked any consistency or flair like the book had, and audiences had higher opinions of it, but mostly agreed with the critics, which led to a very poor return from the box office, only making $116 million against a rough estimate of a $99 million budget. Which isn't bad for a movie like this, but it does prove that while a movie adaptation isn't a bad thing, a TV series would have benefited from this story. The plot of both the movie and the book are retellings of Abraham Lincoln's life, just changing certain elements of the story by adding vampires into the mix, which culminates in the vampires from the South fighting in the American Civil War. Can Abraham stop these vampires from taking over all of the United States, or will they... Actually, I don't think I need to finish that sentence, considering we all know how the American Civil War ended. Despite the movie's glaring writing problems, I will admit the cast is the best part of the movie. All the performers put their best foot forward and gave really compelling performances, at least for what this movie was going for. Honestly, the only criticisms I can give to the cast is that most of them don't have accents, which is annoying when the movie is still supposed to be historically accurate and they don't even give the southern vampires southern accents or have Abraham's accent. I won't lie to you guys, it was hard finding anything besides the cast to talk about for this section, but I do think that the action is at least a little creative. Some of the scenes with Abraham fighting the vampires in this movie are visually creative and are fun to watch. The best scene is where Abraham fights the vampire who killed his mother as they fight in the middle of a stampede of horses, which shows off the vampire, Jack Bartz, played by Martin Soka's, strength and have him throwing around the horses while having Abraham, played by Benjamin Walker, be forced to strategize about how to fight him off. It is the best scene of the movie and is one of the examples of how a movie can improve something from the book. Unfortunately, everything else about this movie does suck. So I've boiled down the problems of this movie into 3 points, which I categorize into least terrible to downright annoying. Number 1, the writing. I'm giving this one a little less flack, as I can understand that translating a book into a movie is very difficult. Depending on the length of the book, it may be very hard to condense all of the important plot points and still keep the movie interesting for a movie-going audience. However, this doesn't excuse any movie with bad writing, especially one where it can be easily solved by having the book be turned into a TV show or a miniseries. With this movie in particular, the writing feels like it was written by a kid who rushed through his book report in one night, which is shown as the movie bounces around different moments in Abraham's life to the point that all of the characters in this movie have little to no impact on Abraham's life or his secret life as a vampire hunter. One moment in particular is when we are introduced to the character Joshua Speed, played by Jimmy Simpson, who has these weird moments of being jealous of Abraham and his closest friend, Will Johnson, played by Anthony Mackie, which only leads to a throwaway moment at the end of the movie. There's no motivation for this other than to trick the audience into believing that Speed might betray Abraham. Even the villain's motivation is rushed, and they weren't even in the book! If the writing was more fleshed out and showed more of the great character moments from the book, I think this movie could have been more fun. Number 2, the editing. Not only does this movie have horrible writing, but it also has some of the worst editing I've seen from a movie in a long while. It feels like the movie was edited by a cocaine addict on a sugar high. It's that crazy. which sadly does affect all of the fight scenes in the movie because they're edited so fast and so poorly that I couldn't see most of the action happening on screen. On top of that, the movie has weird moments where it was probably going to be filmed in 3D, but the studio said, nah, let's film half the shots in 3D but make the rest of the movie in 2D. That'll give everyone a collective headache. Finally, the villains are the worst change of the movie. In the book, there's no main villain, as the book focuses more on the conflict between the Union and the Confederacy, including the vampires' ideologies, like why the Northern vampires want to help out in the war and what their goals are. But in the movie, to keep it simple, they gave us a villain that has very little to no motivation. It takes away from what I thought was done so well in the book and focused more on the life and journey of Abraham Lincoln and what led to the Civil War. Instead, we got dumbed down villains and takes away the interesting look at the ideological reasons that started the Civil War in favor of a villain that's just the bad guy. To be perfectly honest, this movie is a mess. While it does have some good action scenes and a really great cast, it's still ruined by bad writing, god-awful pacing, and horrid editing. The only people I can recommend this movie to are people who are looking for something similar to 300, but even then there are much better movies that do this type of genre. However, I still highly recommend the book for those who haven't read it yet, as it takes this concept and creates an interesting historic story with some fun and inventive ways of explaining Abraham Lincoln's life with vampires. Overall, I give the movie adaptation of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter a 2 out of 10. This book deserves a much better adaptation than the one we got, and hopefully someone will see the potential it has. Thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night,